Welcome back to History and Coffee. And today we're going to talk about the most American of footwear, the cowboy boot. Now, the cowboy boot actually has a pretty interesting history to it, and I figured it would fit in well with the uh, the Bowie knife video I did and some of the other stuff I'll be doing down the road. So we talk about the cowboy era in American history. And first, I want to say, interestingly enough, I mentioned this in another video, but the term cowboy itself in the 19th century was actually a derogatory term. People would use cowboy in the same way we would describe a criminal element today. So think like the word thug or riff-raff or something like that. That was what cowboy was used as. Cowboys who referred to themselves as cowboys and such, like the gang around the OK Corral shootout and the Vengeance Ride with Wyatt Earp and all that stuff. They were referring to themselves as that for sort of intimidation purposes. It's like a gang going around calling themselves the thugs or the gangsters or something like that. Same thing with the word cowboy. Honest cowboys, which were actually pretty few and far between, and I'll talk about that, would generally refer to themselves as ranch hands or cattle drivers. Again, it was cattle driving in the 19th century was probably the most dangerous job that you could have, and it paid almost nothing. It was the absolute bottom rung of society, and as such, it attracted people who were very, very nefarious. So generally people who really had no other choice but to do this work, did this work. And so you had a mix of people who were escaping debts or escaping crimes or just, like in the case of Billy the Kid, they grew up an orphan, pretty much had nothing, and so he became a cowboy. So the boots are interesting because now there's really no other place in the world that has sort of a mounted workforce like we did. We had a lot of wide open spaces, huge ranges of cattle, and we needed a workforce on horseback to sort of maintain this. And that's really where these boots come from. Now, of course, the very first cowboy boots would have been surplus Civil War riding boots, cavalry boots, which came up to the knee. They were very similar to the British riding boots. But the issue with those boots is they were designed for specifically riding a horse. And being a cowboy was a little bit more than just riding a horse. You had to dismount and you had to do work on foot and things like that. And that's really where these boots came from. And there's nobody's really has been credited. There's some stuff out there about a gentleman in 1875 who sort of developed the first cowboy boot, but really how these things came about was when these guys, really the first generation of cowboys, when their surplus Civil War cavalry boots began to wear out, they went to local boot makers. Every town had a leather guy, just like a blacksmith or a farrier or any of that other stuff. And they went and they bought new boots, and they basically sort of requested what they wanted. So, they knew what they wanted in a riding boot, but they also needed something that they could work in and something that was comfortable. And the cowboy boots sort of spontaneously developed out of that. And now, of course, you see really ornate, these have a little bit of a design on them, but the sort of really ornate cowboy boots. And that comes down to the, like I mentioned in my Wild West myth versus fact video, cowboys would advertise their services with their leather goods. So the more ornate, more fancy the saddle, the boots, the holster, things like that were, if you rode up with those things trying to get a job, you'd probably get it because it's, oh well, he must be getting a lot of work because he's able to afford all these fancy leather goods. It was basically a billboard, or a resume. The quality of your leather goods were your 19th century cowboy resume. So that's really where the cowboy boot comes from. And of course, now they have a specific style that they've sort of grown into, and they're mostly just worn for fashion now. But yeah, back then it was just sort of a spontaneous invention. Needed new boots. I liked my old Civil War riding boots, but hey, maybe we should make them a little shorter, you know, maybe a little bit more point at the toe, or a little bit more heel, and that's really where the cowboy boot came from. So short video, and I hope you learned something.